The urgent question. David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask the Minister for Business and Trade if he will make a statement on compensation and other outstanding matters relating to the Post Office Horizon scandal?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister indicated a few minutes ago, I'm informing the House about further steps the Government is taking to address the Horizon scandal. The Government is taking measures to speed the flow of compensation. We have already set a target of issuing initial offers for 90% of group litigation order cases within 40 days of receiving a completed application. And I announced in November that we would be introducing a £600,000 upfront offer for claims with overturned convictions, which people could choose to take rather than going through the detailed assessment process. This has already made a real difference. Before my announcement, only 5 of those people had reached full and final settlements. I can now report that with the help of the minimum payment, we have finalised 30 cases. This has obviously speeded up matters along for those who have taken this upfront offer. It's also helped those who have chosen individual assessment because resources can be concentrated on those cases. I can announce today that we are taking similar measures in respect of the group litigation order scheme. We will now make people in that scheme an upfront offer of £75,000, which will save them having to go through a full assessment. But, as with overturned convictions, if they believe they are entitled to more, they are welcome to continue with the full assessment. Not only will this allow the Department to focus its resources on the larger cases, it will allow claimants' lawyers to do the same. The pace at which we can get claims into the scheme is the key constraint on how quickly we can settle them. The upfront offer is smaller for the GLO scheme than that for the overturned convictions because the claims tend to be smaller. We estimate that perhaps a third of GLO claimants may want to consider this route. I'm sure the House will welcome this measure. When I made my statement on Monday, I heard all parts of the House share my desire to ensure justice for postmasters who have been convicted of offences as part of the scandal. The whole House is united on this, and I believe that in the light of last week's excellent ITV series, I think the whole nation is united on it too. We've all been moved by the stories of postmasters who have been unjustly convicted and the terrible effects over a period of 2 decades of their finances, their health and their relationships. Indeed, we have seen whole lives ruined by this brutal and arbitrary exercise of power. Hundreds of convictions remain extant. Some of those convictions will have relied on the evidence of the discredited Horizon system. Others will have been the result of appalling failures of the Post Office investigation and prosecution functions. The evidence, which is already emerging from Sir Wyn Williams' inquiry, has shown not only incompetence but malevolence in many of their actions. This was evidence which was not available to the courts when they made their decisions on individual cases. So far, 95 of over 900 convictions have been overturned. We know that postmasters have been reluctant to apply to have their convictions overturned. Many of them have decided that they have been through enough and they cannot face further engagement with authority. Many fear having their hopes raised only to be dashed yet again. The Horizon Compensation Advisory Board has recommended that we should overturn all the convictions of the postmasters who were prosecuted in the Horizon scandal. I think their motivation for doing so is absolutely right, and we will work with them to speed up the process. Can I put on record my thanks to Lord Arbuthnot, who's in the gallery today, and also the Right Honourable Member for North Durham for their work on this campaign generally and on that advisory board. Following their recommendation would involve quite unprecedented action by Parliament to overturn specific verdicts of the courts. The Government, of course, completely recognises the importance of an independent court system and judiciary. So this recommendation raises important issues of constitutional principle. This is therefore not a decision we can take lightly. It also creates the risks of a different sort of injustice. I'm sure that a great many people were wrongly convicted in this scandal, but I cannot tell the House that all of those prosecuted were indeed innocent, or even that it was 90% or 80 or 70. Without retrying every case, we cannot know. So the risk is that instead of unjust convictions, we shall end up with unjust acquittals, and we just do not know how many. The only way we could tell would be to put all cases through the courts, further dragging out the distress for many innocent people.
Order. Can I just say, this is a very important issue. I'm going to allow the Minister to continue, but I'm going to say to the opposition, your time also increases with the others, and to Sir David as well. It is important, too important an issue to curtail it, but I would say to officials, they really ought to be aware that when they do provide speeches, it is for 3 minutes. But I do want you to fulfil this because the issue is far, far too important. Minister.
Can I thank you for that, Mr. Speaker, and I apologise for the length of this statement, this urgent response to the urgent question, but it is, as you say, of vital importance. So we have been faced with a dilemma: either accept the present problem of many people carrying the unjustified slur of conviction, or accept that an unknown number of people who have genuinely stolen from their post office will be exonerated or perhaps even compensated. I can therefore announce that we intend to bring forward legislation as soon as we can to overturn the convictions of all those convicted in England or Wales on the basis of post office evidence given during the Horizon scandal. The Government will, in the coming days, consider whether to include the small number of cases that have already been considered by the appeal courts and the convictions upheld. We recognise this is an exceptional step, but these are exceptional circumstances. As the House knows, people with convictions which have been overturned are offered a choice between having their compensation individually assessed or settling on an upfront offer of £600,000. So as far as possible, we want to avoid guilty people walking away with hundreds of thousands of pounds of public money. But we cannot make the provision of compensation subject to a detailed examination of guilt. Because we have concluded that to do so would be unfair to individuals to ask the court to do that again. And we cannot turn this into an administrative exercise. So all we ask is that as part of their claims of compensation, postmasters sign a statement to the effect they did not commit the crimes of which they are accused. Anyone subsequently found to have signed such a statement untruthfully will be putting themselves at risk of prosecution or fraud. I do not pretend to the House that this is a foolproof device, but it is a proportionate one which respects the ordeal with which these people have already suffered. It means that an honest postmaster will have his or her conviction overturned, and just by signing one document can secure compensation. No one should take our decision as a criticism of the judiciary. Their original decisions were taken in good faith, in the understanding that prosecutions were properly conducted and that assertions about the robustness of the Horizon system were true. But as I said earlier, these are exceptional circumstances and we need to act quickly and decisively. Time is one thing that we and the convicted postmasters do not have. Our arrangement will apply to all those convicted in England and Wales based on post office investigations, including those prosecuted by other bodies who relied on the product of those investigations, the fruit of a poisoned tree. We have plenty more work to do on this solution. We need to prepare the legislation, and I want to discuss our solution with the advisory board. I'm meeting them later this afternoon. Some prosecutions have been undertaken in Scotland and Northern Ireland, where justice is devolved. We are, of course, engaging the Scottish and Northern Irish administrations in respect of wrongful convictions in their jurisdictions. We will do these things as quickly as we can and keep the House informed. The House will have heard that we are well aware of the imperfections of this solution. I'm sure that this will attract some critics. But when they criticise, of course, I then invite them to say what they would do otherwise. Would they leave many people suffering under the burden of unjust convictions for many years, or perhaps forever, with no access to compensation? Or would they create some administrative process for deciding innocence which is more onerous for the victims? So I very much hope the whole House will stand with the government to deliver rapid justice to convicted postmasters who have been waiting much, much too long.
Can I just say, I will extend the time. I think it was so important to get all of this on the record. I do believe you did want to make a statement, but you're overruled. But at least we've certainly got the statement now. David Davis. Sir
Mr. Speaker, as the Minister said earlier this week, many of us across the Chamber called for this appalling injustice to be solved in months, not years. And it looks as though the government has responded correctly to that, to that call, ensuring swift justice for those affected. But undoubtedly there are difficult constitutional and legal issues involved in this, as he laid out in detail. Some of the victims I've spoken to say they need an individual exoneration rather than a grand pardon, because they are understandably concerned at being bracketed with a very small number of people who will actually not be innocent. Now, will the Minister give us an undertaking to continue to look into this matter to address these quite proper concerns for the legitimate victims? I would also welcome further elaboration on the issue of compensation. Fujitsu has played a central role in this scandal and is still at the heart of government IT systems. Can the Minister tell the House whether Fujitsu will be required to meet some of the costs of the undoubtedly enormously expensive compensation we're paying out? And finally, will the government accelerate the investigations to convict those who are really guilty of causing this scandal by perverting the course of justice?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his urgent question and for his collaboration with us on these matters. Of course, we look very carefully at the issue of individual exoneration. That we didn't see any way possible to do that without an exhaustive and time-consuming administrative process, which would add further burdens to the burdens people have already suffered during this process. The other issue is getting people to come forward, again, which has been one of the major issues in getting people to appeal their convictions. So we saw this very much as the lesser of two evils in terms of the solution we have adopted. But nevertheless, we are very keen to discuss mitigations and safeguards with other members of the House. I set out one in my remarks earlier on, and one of the requirements to sign a statement of innocence. But I'm very keen to work with him to look at other mechanisms we can use to make sure that these people who do get their convictions overturned in access compensation are actually innocent of the charges. He raises the point about Fujitsu, a very important point. Has been raised many times. As he knows, a part of what the government did, it put in place a statutory inquiry. Sir Win Williams is chairing that inquiry. It is due to complete by the end of the year and hopefully report soon after. At that point in time, we'll be able to assess more clearly who is actually responsible. I know many people may have formed a view on that already, but we think it's right that we follow a process. We've identified individuals or organisations who are responsible for this scandal. Of course, those organisations we would expect then to financially contribute. So there are financial and legal measures we can take, and as regards individuals, of course, it may well be there's sufficient evidence for the authorities to take forward individual prosecutions, and I think many in this House would welcome that.
Shadow Secretary of State Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for granting this urgent question, and I congratulate the honourable member for securing it. This is an issue that has rightly left the public outraged at the scale and shocking details of this injustice. As I said on Monday, on this side of the House we believe the Horizon scandal to be one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in British history, where people lost their livelihoods, liberty and their lives, and then when trying to find justice were delayed at every turn. It is unconscionable that despite the landmark legal rulings, several years on, people have still not been able to access the compensation that they are entitled to. And we are all united in this House in wanting the sub-postmasters exonerated in full and for them to receive compensation with urgency. And I do think, Mr Speaker, it's important to say exoneration and not a pardon, because a pardon does imply guilt that is then forgiven. We recognise doing so is not straightforward, and it may be imperfect. But this is an unprecedented scandal, and it will require an unprecedented response. And the alternatives of not acting I see as even less desirable. We therefore stand ready to work with the government to deliver a solution that achieves the long-awaited justice and compensation at pace. Can I thank the Minister for the ongoing conversations we've been having on this matter and ask him if he can guarantee that compensation payments will immediately follow any exonerations under the terms of the compensation schemes as they stand today. Could he indicate any sort of timescale for this? I know he appreciates that victims cannot continue to wait years for payments. Given what he has said about the implications of a blanket exoneration, we will need to consider what safeguards might be necessary as best as is possible to ensure public money does not flow into the pockets of those who are not entitled to it. And he mentioned the potential of a statement that people may be asked to sign, and I wonder if he could say if that will be drawn up in close consistency and work with the advisory committee. Crucially, we discussed on Monday the cases that have now been identified from the pre-Horizon pilot scheme, but which are identical to those coming out of Horizon. Will these cases be covered by any proposal the government brings forward? Because any plan that does not cover all convictions will rightly not command the full support of this House. Mr Speaker, as the sub-postmasters have repeatedly said, and it must surely be they who get the credit for these extraordinary measures, what matters now is getting compensation to people swiftly. And this whole House is united in its determination to deliver the justice, truth and compensation that has been denied and delayed time and time again.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, can I thank him for his response to my earlier remarks, and I appreciate his offer to work with us and to stand with us to deliver the compensation and the overturning of convictions. The first step will be, of course, legislation, and again, this is something we're very happy to work with him on. The legislation may take some weeks to deliver, but the sooner the better, and that will be a matter for the House, or both Houses, of course, in terms of the introduction and passing of that legislation. But our intention is to get on with that very, very quickly, of course. From that, it should be the case. It was a simple process, a statement that needs to be signed, as he refers to and I referred to earlier, and of course we'll work with the advisory board to make sure that statement is an appropriate one. Following a signing of that statement, if people choose the detailed assessment route, that is a more complex route, of course, because it's not just financial loss. You're looking at that. You're looking at personal impacts as well, health impacts, for example, or impacts on livelihood, other livelihoods and consequential losses. But if people choose the fixed sum award route, £600,000, that's a process that can happen very, very quickly. And one of the reasons we've managed to get 30 settlements settled already, in full and final settlements, many of those using the fixed sum route. He raised the issue again about people using the pilot version of Horizon, something we're cognizant of. It's our understanding every postmaster around the country was written to should be aware of the compensation schemes available. Certainly we believe the schemes cover that pilot period for Horizon. Very happy to work with him and indeed the Right Honourable Member for North Durham to make sure those people that have identified already have indeed been contacted. The good news is, following the ITV dramatisation, the excellent dramatisation, we've seen a good number of new cases come to light. We are keen for that to happen, for people to come forward, whether they've suffered convictions or whether they've just suffered financial detriment through shortfalls, and we're keen to make sure those people get access to compensation as quickly as possible.
Paul Scully.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister and the Lord Chancellor for the work that they have done? I know it's been longer in the making than the drama series, but meeting the promise of over 2 days coming up with the first stage of the solution. Too many victims want nothing to do with the British justice system, nothing to do with the Post Office, nothing to do with government. They have had enough. So does my honourable friend agree with me that there is no perfect solution to this? The best we can aim for is one that is fast and the one that provides life-changing money to restore these people's lives as best we can.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for his question, but also for the sterling work he did as a predecessor in his particular job. And I think many people recognise the incredible work he did following the outcome of that court case and the compensation schemes that he instigated. He's right to say there is no perfect solution here, and we worked across government to try and find the best possible solution. If we want a solution that is, as he said, fast and provides life-changing compensation to people who have been deprived of that in recent years, and this, we believe, is the best solution.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Marion Fellows.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable gentleman for securing this very important urgent question. And I'm sorry it wasn't a statement, because I would have prior sight then of what the Minister was going to say. We were stood here on Tuesday, and I did ask, how long was some time, and I'm glad to see that things are progressing very quickly, with a note of caution, and I totally understand the hesitation in a blanket, any kind of act, bill or whatever, but we need to move things forward. I think also we need to keep on the momentum that the ITV series absolutely engendered in press, here, everywhere. But I think we also still need to listen to the victims. And only this morning, some of the sub-postmasters were saying, we should all stop referring to compensation. We should be referring to financial redress. Yeah. This isn't compensation. This is money due to them. Yeah. And we need to get it to them as quickly as possible. And what others have said, is, especially the Honourable Member for Sutton and Cheam, who just said that people don't want to go anywhere near justice, don't want to go anywhere near Post Office. We have to encourage people to come forward. I'm meeting again myself with constituents who were involved who haven't officially approached me, and I'm sure many others across the House will be in exactly the same position. Scottish law is different. The Minister is well aware of that, and the Cabinet Secretary for Justice made a statement yesterday. She also said that they were looking at, Scottish Government were looking at Fujitsu contracts, and that's really important. There will be no hesitation. I can't speak for the Scottish Government, but I know there will be no hesitation in moving things forward. And as Chair of the APPG, I'm going to be writing to the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal Service in Scotland myself. So thank you.
Well, can I thank you for your questions, and also once again for the work she does on the all-party group for post offices. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to share a statement with her, but I hope but I appreciate the fact she's welcomed what we've done here today. I'm very happy to term this as redress, of course. This is only about putting people back where they would have been and trying to make good for what's happened to them. So in that terms, I understand what she's saying about compensation, but this really is there to compensate people financially and for other losses and other impacts on their lives. I couldn't agree with her more in terms of the number one thing we'd like to happen, as well as delivering more compensation more quickly and making sure that's done fairly, but also we want more people to come forward. And with a simplified process, of course, a process that won't require postmasters themselves to file an appeal, it will mean that this is done more quickly, and the access to compensation, the routes for compensation have been simplified. We very much hope people will come forward, and that seems to be our experiences right now, and we'll continue to engage with the devolved administrations, of course, to make sure they have everything they need, as they may want to adopt similar measures.
Duncan Baker.
Speaker. I welcome this legislation coming forward, and I thank the Minister for the amount of work he's done on this at such great speed. We are still, I think, at a midway point in the journey. There are still criminal prosecutions to come next. One question that has never been answered is just how much money was taken unlawfully from thousands of innocent men and women. The Post Office took that money. We have never known that figure, and even the most basic accountant knows that it will run into hundreds of millions of pounds. So could the Minister find out from the Post Office, force them to publish just the grand scale of how much money they stole from people?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for once again contributing to these important debates we have in this House on this particular matter, and he brings first-hand experience with this, of course, as probably the only postmaster that's currently serving in this House. It's quite right to say this. The money was taken. Somebody must have noticed that money. You would think the finance departments would have noticed that money. You think auditors might have noticed that money, because it appeared clearly in some kind of suspense account and presumably was transferred out of that at some point. I will endeavour to find out the number. I don't have a number. One thing we do know, having said that, is prior to Horizon being implemented, installed within the Post Office network, there were around 5 convictions, prosecutions a year. That suddenly jumped to about 60 per year. So we know this is very significant proportions. And I think the fact there are around 3,500 postmasters in the various compensation schemes illustrates the scale of this problem. So, but I'll endeavour to find a number for him.
Kevan Jones.
Can I thank the Right Honourable Member for Haltemprice and Howden for asking for this UQ. I know the Minister wanted to make a statement, but was overruled by number 10, so the Prime Minister got the glory of announcing this. But the serious point here, Mr Speaker, if we hadn't got this UQ, there'd be no debate on this today, which I think is a disgrace.
Absolutely.
He knows that the Advisory Board has been grappling with this Gordian knot for quite a few months now, and that's why we wrote our letter before Christmas to the Justice Secretary. He's right, this is going to be messy whichever way we do it, but it needs to be done because we've still got people out there with those convictions that need overturning. Can I just say to him that I think I welcome the Advisory Board's discussion later on this afternoon and obviously in the next few weeks and how the legislation takes place, but can I urge him to, and I know he will, to engage with all other political parties in this House, because I think if we can get all party support for this proposal, it makes it a lot stronger. And can I also say that the point raised by my honourable friend for Stalybridge and Hyde is important about the pre-Horizon schemes. And can I just check in terms of compensation, which I do welcome, by the way, is changes in compensation. That will speed things up for some victims. But in terms of those that have their convictions overturned who have died, will their estates be able to access the compensation?
Yeah. Minister.
Yeah. Well, once again, thank the Right Honourable Member for North Durham for all his work across this campaign for many years, but also his work on the Advisory Board, which is an essential part of the resolution we're seeking to find. Of course, I'll continue to work cross-party as we have done all the way through this, from the back benches as I was, and now on the front benches, of course, and I appreciate the support and engagement we've had with all political parties in this area, both front benches and back benches. Yes, we're cognizant of the pre-Horizon pilot scheme, and we're keen to make sure, we'll keep working to make sure those people are included in compensation as well. And yes, if people have sadly passed away, and there's over 60 have passed away waiting for compensation, waiting for justice, those people, the compensation amounts go to their estates and therefore to their families, and that's an assurance I can give him, of course.
Priti Patel.
Speaker, the Minister has announced that approximately 1/3 of the individuals involved in the group litigation, the 555, will benefit from the upfront payment of £75,000. Can he outline what other support will there be for those in that group litigation that suffered losses way in excess of that £75,000? And in particular, how will the government assess not just the financial losses but the reputational damage that they suffered, the health impacts, and quite frankly the family breakdowns that many of them endured as well? And how will this work in practice? Because I think, as the Minister has outlined already, time is pressing. This is very difficult. There's no one-size-fits-all to this. But actually, individuals need to feel that recompense sooner rather than later, and feel that justice from this institutional state failure is going to actually act in their favour.
Well, can I thank her also for a question and the number of times she's raised this particular issue and set out how her thoughts on this, which have proved very useful. The 30% of people we think will choose the fixed sum award route for the group litigation order scheme, £75,000 route. Clearly, that's an estimate based on some. At least we have some evidence from the other scheme how effective that is. If people choose not to go down that route, they can go down the full assessment route. So if people believe their losses are in excess of that, they can go down the full assessment route. We're trying to make that as rapid as possible. It's a process of alternative dispute resolution, so potentially things can happen very quickly. If that can't be agreed, then it goes to an independent panel for assessment. So there's independence as part of every single different process. People who go down that route as well, of course, can get interim payments so that they're not in financial hardship if that's needed. So we are keen to make sure, A, that people get a fair amount, but it's also seen to be fair. And that independence as part of the process is an essential part of the process.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Right Honourable Member for securing this urgent question, but also thank the Minister for the swiftness with which he has acted, and particularly his recognition of the need to talk to the devolved administrations and recognition of the fact that the situation in Scotland is slightly different, as the Post Office was not able to prosecute there. It was done through the official Crown services. So, with that in mind, and the need that he has already expressed to encourage people to come forward, because in Scotland it's very much more difficult to gauge how many people were affected. Encourage people to come forward. But it's not just enough for us to say, please come forward, that there will be some proactive campaign almost to encourage people to come forward and reassure them that they will not face the same sort of delays that victims of Hillsborough and the infected blood scandal have faced, and that this will be acted upon swiftly for them.
Minister.
I thank her for her remarks. Just a case in point, although they were prosecuted under different authorities in Scotland and Northern Ireland, the cases were prepared generally by the Post Office themselves. So I don't think we've got any greater confidence about the status of those convictions than we have in the rest of the UK. So we're very keen to engage with the Scottish administration on what we are doing, and hopefully there will be a consistent scheme across the UK. I agree with her entirely that we need to be proactive in our message to people about coming forward, and that should be our message very clearly from this House, that we're working together and that this process is now a much more streamlined process that won't even require postmasters necessarily to make an application for their conviction to be overturned. So that will happen much more quickly, and then the access routes we have now for compensation are much swifter, more rapid, and so I think those things alone will mean more people come forward. And as I say, we've seen a good number of new people come forward. I think Hudgell's one of the solicitors involved in the claims for some of the victims have seen, I think, 130 new people contact them on the basis of the TV programme, of course, and possibly because of the new actions we're taking to make sure compensation is available more smoothly and easily.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister and all of us in this House will recognise the desire to get the swiftest possible redress for the victims of this appalling injustice. But will the Minister also accept that to legislate to overturn convictions which were imposed by our independent courts is constitutionally quite exceptional? And therefore, in justifying that, will he set out in full what consideration was given to the practicality of going down the normal route of referring those convictions to the Court of Appeal before the legislative route was decided upon? What discussions were there with the senior judiciary about the practicality of this? And given the constitutional and novel nature of the legislation, will he consider seriously that committing for the committee stage of any bill to be taken on the floor of this House? Yes. And secondly, because it's novel and constitutional, would he consider that this is appropriate for a draft bill to be given swift pre-legislative scrutiny?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his question and for his willingness to work with us? And I discussed this matter with him only in the last few days. So I appreciate his expertise and his advice. Yes, absolutely. This is a very significant step and one we would not take lightly. We fully respect the independence of the courts. So it's important. I think we set out very clearly the reasons why this is different. I think that's important. So we're setting a precedent here. It is clear why we're setting such a precedent. And I think the involvement of private prosecutions here is very relevant, and that's again work he has done on the Justice Select Committee, of course. My right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, Lord Chancellor, has engaged with the people he refers to the judiciary to make sure they were understanding of what we were doing and why we were doing it, and those conversations I think were constructive rather than being resisted. So I think, but very happy to take him up on his offer to continue that engagement and discuss the draft bill with him.
Chair of the Select Committee, Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thanks to the Right Honourable Member for Howden and Haltemprice. I'm very much looking forward to cross-examining the Minister when he comes before the Business and Trade Committee next Tuesday, when we'll be hearing evidence from Mr Bates and his colleagues, and we will be putting questions to Fujitsu too. Can I push him on the point I made on Monday night, which is that 3 years after the landmark case, 85% of the convictions have not been overturned. Only 4% of the cases have resulted in a full and final settlement. And we've heard evidence from victims this week already that even when settlements have been made, the cash has not yet been handed over. So can I ask the Minister again, what is his target? What's his goal, approximate or otherwise? When will those wrongfully prosecuted have their full and final settlements delivered on in cash?
Minister.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to appearing before his Select Committee, and I have some challenging questions for me which I would welcome. Just to be clear, 64% of all those affected by this scandal have been compensated, full and final compensation. He's talking about the smaller cohort, which is the convictions, and the small cohort have come forward, of course, and so there's only 95 have had convictions overturned. We have introduced, to try and expedite compensation to those people, we introduced the fixed sum award route, which is proving very successful. I'm not aware of the point he raises in terms of people not actually having the cash. I'm very happy to engage with him on it, because there's every intention that once that decision has been taken to go down the fixed sum award, that sum is paid pretty much instantly. So I'm very happy to find out exactly what's happening in those cases. Where people have gone down a full assessment route, of course, that is more complex, understandably, various different considerations will be taken about loss. It could be in terms of forensic, financial forensic information, or indeed health, and looking at things like reputational loss, of course, which are also a key facet of some of these cases, most of these cases. In terms of the date he's looking for, our date has always been to deliver all this compensation by August of this year. That's our date still. We'd like to do it more rapidly than that, and for many people we will do it more rapidly than that, but not everything within the timescales are within our gift, because it does require, if people go down a full assessment route, that they compile a claim that we can then respond to. But we've set some time requirements, time criteria for us, service levels, to be able to respond to those claims in a timely fashion.
Sir Oliver Hill.
Can I thank the Minister for engaging with the concept of trying something innovative to move this on. I mean, I do think it's right that the senior judiciary should be consulted, but even so, I think it's probably the only way to make this move speedily. Can I thank him for also having a meeting with me to discuss my constituent, Mrs. Javinda Barang, who's a constituent I've been talking about on this subject for a long time. But she was one of the first to have her conviction overturned more than 3 years ago, and she's still waiting for her full individually assessed compensation. And I'm just wondering, is there anything more that can be done in terms of putting in extra legal resource or assessors or something of that sort to get this case finally dealt with? And is he able to give me any sort of timescale?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him? And it was a pleasure to meet him yesterday and on other occasions to talk about his constituent, Mrs. Jardine Barang. As he is aware, people have had convictions overturned can choose two routes: the individual assessment of claim or the fixed sum award. The fixed sum award is much more rapid, of course. Individual assessments can be complicated. I can't probably speak about a specific case in terms of where that case is, although I'm happy to come back to him on that particular issue. One thing, the benefit of the fixed sum award, people who choose to go down the route, of course, then don't need the resources of both their own legal representation, but also the resources used on our side in terms of assessing, or on the post office side, in terms of assessing claims. So it does make the whole process more rapid. Very happy to continue to work with him, as we are doing with the advisory board, to try and make this whole process more streamlined, more rapid, and that's a challenge we will continue to try and meet wherever we can.
Bridget.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the announcement that all convictions of sub-postmasters based on the flawed Horizon evidence will be overturned. But could I ask the Minister why, when the material facts of these cases have not changed, many of them have been known for over a decade, why does he think it's taken the airing of a TV docudrama and the public outcry associated with it to force this government, and indeed this whole House, to do belatedly the right thing for innocent victims of a huge miscarriage of justice? What does it say about our democracy and about our judicial system? And can he think of any other issues which perhaps could benefit from the same level of scrutiny by the media?
Minister.
Well, I do thank him for his work. He's been a constant campaign on behalf of his constituents, and he contributed to every debate I've seen in this particular issue. I must say, I think his challenge is a little bit unfair. We have worked... He knows I've worked on this as a backbencher, as well as been my number one priority as a minister for the last 15 months. This is not something we've just picked up. He can see the number of things we have done. Of course, during this process, you learn things. There are things that happen that you don't expect. We didn't expect it to be so difficult for people to overturn convictions, of course, from when the first convictions were overturned. So these are processes we have learned. We didn't expect it to be so difficult to assess the damages and losses of people. So we've tried at every point to try and accelerate compensation. Last November, we introduced the fixed sum award. That's way before the TV series, of course, and indeed we dealt with things like tax treatments before then, and we started to look at different ways to overturn convictions way before the TV series was aired. So it's not the case that this TV series, excellent though it was, has resulted in these different changes. It's fair to say, I think the whole House and the whole country has been was shocked by what it's seen on the television. So it has made it easier to push certain things forward more quickly. But I think we would have arrived at this position anyway. But I'm glad we're here today, moving this forward at the pace we're moving it forward at now.
Sir Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome the statement by the Prime Minister and by my honourable friend today, and I join in my thanks to him for his hard work and indeed the work of other ministers, the member for Sutton and Cheam, in pursuing this injustice and dealing with it. The key thing to remember here, Mr. Speaker, is that the number of people that just refuse to come forward means that this House, this Parliament, has an obligation to act. In doing so, is it not the case that in existing appeals, the matter can be dealt with by the Court of Appeal in terms of quashing any convictions pursuant to an Act of Parliament, but that the key challenge lies in all those people who aren't before the court system? And will he work with me and others to make sure that the system that he's envisaging, I think he's talking about statutory declarations, that presumably might be under Section 5 of the Perjury Act,
Can we get that right in order to avoid further disincentives for innocent people to clear their name and, in the words of judges up and down the country, to walk from court without a stain on their character?
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his work and his advice over recent days? And I think one of the things he said about this particular issue when we're trying to resolve this, there's no perfect solution we can come to here. So there's going to be compromises. And we are very, very keen to reach out to the people that he identifies who haven't entered the system because they are deterred by the processes they would have to go through to access compensation. So absolutely, very keen to continue to work with him on all the different measures we'll put in place, and we need to put in place over the next few weeks to make sure we get this right and right first time.
Sir George Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with others in thanking the Minister for his statement today, during the course of which he did acknowledge that people would be concerned that the good intentions might not be backed by action. In order to counter that, will he consider publishing some target dates by which both legal and administrative matters ought to be concluded, so people might get some reassurance that it's not going to drag on like previous scandals, Hillsborough and contaminated blood, for a very long time?
Minister.
Yes, just so we're clear, in terms of the legal and administrative issues on the compensation payments, we hope to complete all those by August. That's why we've set that out. In terms of the inquiry, if that's what you're referring to, the inquiry is due to conclude by the end of this year, and we should see conclusions from that very rapidly, and we're keen to publish that as soon as possible. Also, Win Williams will, of course, as a statutory inquiry, and from then, the authorities may well decide there's grounds to prosecute. We certainly are taking a keen interest in who else might pick up the cost of this compensation, which is currently being borne by the taxpayer, and that's significant cost. And we're keen, where we can identify others responsible, they pay for their wrongdoing.
Mark Francois.
Sir, can I commend the Minister, the Justice Secretary and those who've advised them for having to exercise the judgment of Solomon on this, but nonetheless coming up with a practical and, importantly, rapid solution. On Fujitsu, they're a multi-billion-dollar company with numerous government contracts, including a number with the Ministry of Defence. They have persistently, for years, been reluctant to admit the weakness in their system. Does the Minister agree they now have a moral duty, if not directly a legal one, to put right that wrong? We should review all their government contracts, and if they won't do the right thing, which they should, we should consider suspending.
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his comments, and we do see this as being practical and rapid, as he describes it. In the point of Fujitsu, been raised very often, and he's right to say significant government contracts for the MOD and I think HMRC as well, amongst others. I think it's right that we let the process take its course, that the inquiry looks at who was responsible for what, who was responsible for this between the Post Office and Fujitsu, who told people who to do what. And I think it's only right we have a process, therefore, where we do set some criteria, some parameters about who can access government contracts. And so those are conversations we should have when we've identified exactly who is responsible. We won't be able to do that for some months yet, but we're keen to do it as soon as we possibly can.
Ian Paisley.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. This was an appalling travesty and impacted the lives of so many innocent people in all four corners of this kingdom, and our hearts go out to those people, and I really do welcome the swift action that the government is now taking to resolve this problem, and I hope that it goes some way to help those people through what's been a terrible time. Will he assure me that with regards to Northern Ireland, he will not allow any delay whatsoever in the implementation of these proposals? Excuses are used all the time, well, there's no devolved assembly in Northern Ireland. No devolved minister had any role in this. Therefore, there's no role for them with regards to dealing with the victims. Sort it out for them as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you for his comments, and that's exactly our intention. We are very keen to make this a UK-wide scheme so everybody knows exactly where they stand. As I said before, the same issues, despite the fact the legal system is different in Northern Ireland, the assembly of the cases was done by the Post Office in most cases, the vast majority of cases, so the same issues apply. So we don't want to see any delay. We will be engaging with the Northern Irish authorities, very keen to do that as quickly as possible.
Marion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome this announcement? And the evidence is very clear that hundreds of victims have lost trust in the criminal justice system. So we need an exceptional process that ensures every miscarriage of justice can be put right. But the scandal includes even more than financial redress. Reports that non-disclosure agreements were insisted on by the Post Office, which silenced victims, and particularly the family of former Postmaster Martin Griffiths, felt forced to sign a settlement with the Post Office with a non-disclosure agreement that hid events around Martin taking his own life for almost a decade. Will my right honourable friend urgently reconsider calls that I have made and others have made to ban the use of non-disclosure agreements in all severance agreements? And I'm glad to see his honourable friend, the MOJ Minister, on the front bench as well. I think both of them share my concern and want to see action.
Minister.
Well, a very well-timed question, I would say, with my honourable friend next to me here. She's right to say this is an exceptional process. As she is aware, non-disclosure agreements cannot prevent somebody going to the police, for example. That's not the point she was making. But I understand the point she makes, and I think how she wants to ensure that people are not used for that purpose or for other purposes, including things like sexual harassment and bullying, of course. So she's running a fantastic campaign, and we've heard exactly what she's got to say, and we'll continue to work with her in those terms.
Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting the right honourable gentleman's urgent question. Can I thank the Minister for the heavy lifting that he's had to do in the 15 months that he's held the post as Minister in this. I also commend the Lord Chancellor for work that he's been doing behind the scenes, and he would have been taking some advice and guidance from the Lady Chief Justice. Can the Minister say what her guidance was in this? It's an exceptional matter to be legislating. We all support it, but we'd like to know what our guidance on this was. And secondly, I was instructed many years ago in 2006 as a defence lawyer. Seems to me that we can never, ever again get ourselves into a situation by an organisation like the Post Office bringing private prosecutions, being the complainants, the criminal investigator, and indeed the prosecutors. Will he make a statement about when the government intend to prevent the Post Office from ever prosecuting any matter ever again?
Minister.
Okay, I thank him for his work. I'm aware of his involvement on behalf of his constituents in this area. And yes, I also put on record my thanks to my friend, the Lord Chancellor, who cleared his diary to deal with these issues on a number of occasions, and indeed the Prime Minister as well. Those conversations took place with the Lord Chief Justice. I'm not at liberty to say, I wasn't at the meeting anyway, but I think we don't tend to publish legal advice. But as he knows, there's quite a few lawyers in these two houses, and they're not necessarily all agree with have the same position in terms of legal opinion, of course. So I'm no doubt legal opinions will be made clear. But we know this is exceptional, but it's an exceptional situation, so we have done the exceptional in this case. In terms of private prosecutions, that definitely, if we want to say this must never happen again, private prosecutions played a part in this. He's right to say that. I'm sure he asked for statements. I'm sure my honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, at some point will do that. He's expressed an interest in this and some concerns around private prosecutions in the UK, as has the Justice Select Committee. So I think it's something I'm sure the Lord Chancellor will come back to the House with at some point.
George Freeman.
Mr. Speaker, could I start by thanking the Minister and the Lord Chancellor and Prime Minister for gripping this as quickly as they have, and put on record that I know for a fact that the current Minister, as a former backbencher, the member for Thirsk, and indeed the member for Cheltenham, were advocates as backbenchers on this before they were in office, and I pay tribute to my former colleague, the Minister for Sutton and Cheam, who gripped it following his election in 2015 and his role as Minister. I was never Minister for the Post Office, Mr. Speaker, but I remember as a Minister in the department being asked to cover for an absent Minister, and when refusing to just read out the speech but ask for a proper day of briefings from officials and asked to meet Paula Reynolds, I was told she'd refused to meet me without her lawyer. And I want to highlight that this saga raises some very important issues about scrutiny, accountability, responsibility in our public office and in public administration, difficult questions that this House must tackle. So I want to ask, Mr. Speaker, firstly, if the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, Lord Chancellor, Cabinet Office could look at the wider lessons from this appalling scandal about the failures of accountability, scrutability in our system of government and this House's responsibility ultimately to the people of this country to make sure that government serves the people, not the other way around. And my specific question is on the point raised by my honourable friend, the member from North Norfolk. How much money do we think was stolen off the postmasters, and could he look at some sort of corporate fraud action to get this money back? It was money that was taken off us, taken off them, and we should get it back from the company that took it.
Minister.
Well, I can thank him for his remarks and his question. I'm pleased to say that Paula Reynolds has handed back her CV. I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. I think as part of the inquiry, of course, at some point we identify who is responsible, both individuals and organisations. Clearly, in terms of corporate fraud, the beneficiary here, to some extent, was the Post Office itself. The Post Office has had to be funded by the government to make these payments, of course. So it's difficult to see how we would get money back at the Post Office to do that. But certainly other organisations, such as Fujitsu, and that's something that obviously I've talked about previously and something we'll look at once the inquiry has concluded. I think in terms of scrutiny, I think many ministers will probably ask themselves questions based on what's happened over this, and officials indeed, that it's our job to ask the key questions at the right time and not necessarily take the first answer we are given, to push back and make sure that we are getting to the bottom of an issue. There were failures here, there's no question about it. I'm not going to identify who failed, but I think lots of people will be asking themselves those serious questions. And indeed, the inquiry itself may well identify where we could have done things better.
Ms. Savile Roberts.
Former Plaid Cymru councillor Noel Thomas's 16-year-long quest for justice has had enormous repercussions for him and his family. He faced imprisonment, bankruptcy and the loss of his home. He describes his 9 months in prison as hell on earth. And Noel's story has had wide repercussions throughout North West Wales. I know now of people who will not work on post office counters. This has meant that there are communities that have lost their post offices. Not just individuals have suffered this agony, but also communities have lost essential facilities. What assessment has he made of the loss of post offices following this scandal and the effect that that has had on communities, and particularly rural communities?
Minister.
Well, obviously Mr Thomas featured very heavily in the programme, and can I, on behalf of the government and the Post Office, apologise for what happened to Mr Thomas. It was such a moving story, and I think anybody watching would have been moved to tears by what happened to him and others in that dramatisation. Loss of reputation for individual postmasters, of course, and that's something people can get compensation for. But she's right to say that the Post Office network itself may have suffered some loss of reputation. I still believe our Post Office network is something that's hugely valued, and people hold in very high regard. Our citizens and our constituents hold in very high regard. So the key thing to make sure we have suitable provision in terms of Post Office network around the country is making them financially viable and sustainable. We're working very hard on that. For example, we're encouraging the Post Office to take a firmer line in negotiations, for example, with the banks in terms of the banking framework, which is a significant revenue opportunity already for the network, and things like parcel hubs. We do see a bright future for the network, but I think it's absolutely vital that we draw a line under this particular scandal. Before that, we can secure that future.
Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, can I pay tribute to the Minister for the work he's been doing and to be able to bring this to the Chamber at such speed. The two questions I've got, first of all, is about mental health. The victims, and they were victims of this awful Horizon Post Office scandal, have been traumatised. You know, we've heard the awful stories of individuals who've sadly taken their lives through suicide, and I'm sure many others likely came close to that. I wanted to check that to make sure that the compensation schemes are taken into account the distress and the mental health pressures that they will have undergone over many, many years, including today. The second question I've got is looking to the future and how we stop this happening again. I'm very conscious that there's a big rise in artificial intelligence and the use of that within technology. It's possible to go back to the Horizon system and see where these, in some cases, malicious instances took place. But with artificial intelligence, it's going to get much harder to do that. So I wonder if the Minister could give me assurances that there are checks going to be made in any government systems, especially that use artificial intelligence, to ensure that humans aren't unjustly blamed for artificial intelligence errors that could lead to a similar Horizon scandal in the future.
Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his question? And I know in his time as one of my predecessors, and I thank him for the job he did. I was all too short, his tenure, and he did a great job while he was there. And I know it's something he raised whilst looking after this particular part of the brief. It's something we're discussing with the advisory board in support in terms of mental health to individuals and potentially to families. In terms of redress, that is something very much that compensation schemes take into account, and that's one of the reasons it takes a while to make sure people are properly receive proper redress in just assessment of the impacts of things like that. He raised a very interesting point in AI. I know it's another topic he's very keenly interested in, and certainly the issue of AI within prosecutions is something we should look at very carefully, and I'm sure my right honourable friend, the Lord Chancellor, is looking at it as part of his work.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend the Minister again for his excellent work on this, and this is an unprecedented situation. I think that does require the solution that he is suggesting. Can I ask him again about no public interest cases, my constituent, and whether the situation's changed since I asked him about it on Monday, but also the Post Office. We are having these new cases come forwards that weren't known about before. The Post Office must have a list somewhere. They must have known those people that were held in breach of, through the Horizon accounting system. And I mean, it may be possible that some people are out there frightened to come forward because they've signed non-disclosure agreements. So is it possible that we could go to the Post Office and say, look, come on, cough up, and let's know who you're aware of that is out there that we haven't been contacted by to date, so that those people can then be written to, perhaps by the advisory board, and invited and encouraged to come forward and given the confidence to do so, because they may be out there frightened because they're going to be approached by the Post Office. And if anyone signs one of the agreements that he mentioned, I'm sure they're going to want to be given assurances that they won't be pursued by the Post Office ever again if they sign those agreements.
Well, thank you for his question again on this, and he's been a regular contributor to this particular issue. Public interest cases, we're very keen to include it within the scope of this. Currently, they're treated slightly differently in terms of compensation. We're keen to make that's not the case, that everybody gets the same routes to compensation. It's something the advisory board has been very clear on, and we're keen to make sure that there is a single way forward for people who have suffered from convictions. In terms of people being nervous about coming forward, there's various different people who have written to people with convictions, including the CCRC. So it's we're keen to make sure that there's people, anybody who's out there who might have might have suffered as a result of this scandal is communicated with properly from someone who they trust. Very happy to talk to him and the advisory board about what we've done there, whether we've done enough and whether we could do more.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hundreds of individuals have been wrongfully convicted of crimes that they didn't commit. I commend my honourable friend for the work that he's done on this, and he mentioned during his statement the malevolence that took place during these prosecutions. Why is it right that those individuals who gave false evidence are still potentially in post? Why are managers in the post office still in post knowing what had happened? And shouldn't they be brought to account and lose their livelihoods and their pensions rather than those people that were wrongly convicted?
Well, the short answer to that, thank you for this question. The short answer to that is yes. If people are guilty of offences, ones that can be prosecuted, they should be. And there are all kinds of different routes that might be available to make sure those people suffer as a result of their actions. And we're keen to make sure that happens. We think the inquiry is the right route for that, to be able to expose the evidence. Of course, our prosecutors can look at what's happening within that inquiry at any point, and the evidence that there's before the inquiry is open to anybody to see what's happening at that inquiry. So we would very much hope that the inquiry will identify those responsible and suitable actions will be taken against those people and organisations.
Nick Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And what a sorry tale this is, isn't it? Can I say how glad I am to see a solution being brought forward for this scandal today. But the Post Office is owned by the UK government. It has a shareholder on the board, usually a senior civil servant. And what did these government shareholders tell ministers about this issue over the years? And so does the minister think this arrangement provided sufficient scrutiny over the Post Office for Parliament and the sub-postmasters, please?
Okay. Minister.
Well, I think it's fair to say no. The answer is no, because this scandal has occurred, and those failures must be a systemic failure somewhere along the relationship, whether within the Post Office or within the relationship with different parts of government. We don't know where that failed at this point in time. We're all very keen to see the outcome of the inquiry, which we should conclude by the end of this year, and a report will follow. And we're all keen to see the what conclusions it arrives at, so then we can identify who's responsible and then decide what might be done. It's fair to say my Department of Business and Trade, has learned the lessons itself from what's happened, and I think there's a much better oversight and a governance relationship between the Department now and the Post Office where it is now. But for many people, of course, that is too late. But it's not too late to find the answers that he's looking for.
David Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The entire House will welcome today's announcement. The Government has made exactly the correct decision in terms of the balance of mischief. Could my honourable friend say if the convictions to be quashed under the process he has announced today will include not only those where the prosecuting authority was the Post Office itself, but also those where the authority was the Crown Prosecution Service? And in terms of the latter, will the Ministry of Justice be carrying out a review of the decision-making process prior to the decision to prosecute?
Minister.
Yes, well, thank him for his question. And yes, absolutely, it is the case that we believe that cases here that were prosecuted by CPS would also come under the the overturning convictions would happen in those cases too, not least because the files themselves, as we understand it, were compiled by the Post Office based on their evidence. So it was absolutely right and proper if the evidence wasn't correct. And we know that to be the case because of what's happened at Horizon and because of the behaviour of some of the individuals within the Post Office team, those responsible for investigations. Clearly inappropriate conduct there. So yes is the answer, and it's only right that we look at what happened. And I say my rational friend, the Lord Chancellor, is looking at the whole issue of private prosecutions, for example, and how those cases were put together, and then for how they were prosecuted.
Vicky Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many members across the House have referenced the ITV drama, and it may interest members to know that the director of Mr Bates versus the Post Office is in the gallery today watching PMQs closely and watching this urgent question closely, hoping for some positive news. So it is welcome that we've had some positive news, but they did have a few questions for me to ask the Minister. What they really want to know is, what are the actual timeframes for overturning the convictions? I know there's been some answers on this, but a bit more detail would be helpful. And when will people finally receive the full compensation that they deserve? And when will those that are responsible finally be held to account?
Minister.
Well, thank you for your question. I wasn't aware the director is with us today, and can I just put on record the fantastic job that they have done in terms of bringing this to the public consciousness and indeed raising consciousness within this House itself. One thing that has resulted in is this statement today. I think we probably would have got here at some point anyway, but it's good to be here today at an earlier point than we would have been had that dramatisation not been aired. Time frame, she's right to challenge us on. In terms of the time frames for passing legislation in this House, is always somewhat uncertain because it's not all within the government's gift, of course, as it passes through both houses. So we're keen to do it as quickly as possible. I think it was likely to be a matter of weeks because there's some work we need to do to make sure that legislation is in the right place. In terms of compensation, timescales for final compensation across all schemes, we're hoping to do that by August. Again, we're not in charge of all those timescales because it does require people who want to go through the full assessment route to compile the claim and submit the claim, and then we can respond to it in as quickly as possible. And in terms of the answers she's looking for, which we all want to see, the inquiry is due to conclude by the end of the year, and we would expect a report shortly after, which should give us those answers.
Robert Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for his announcement, and I welcome this statement from the Minister. I know a lot of work has gone into this, but the energy and attention he is bringing to it is very well received, I think, across the House. This is the right thing to do, but notwithstanding the remarks of the Right Honourable Member of Bromley and Chislehurst, but it occurs to me that important information has emerged in evidence during the process of prosecutions so far, and I think the Minister, if I understood his statement correctly, referred to malevolent behaviours through this. So will he ensure that in whatever process unfolds before us, there will be a mechanism by which information that would be useful for consideration in further action would be gathered and collated, given that people will not necessarily have the mechanism of a court case and a legal testing of their situation?
Minister.
Well, thank you for his question. I'm very keen to engage with him to make sure we get what he needs in terms of, yes, malevolence I think is the right word in this aspect, and it's important we learn the lessons from that, and both in terms of things like private prosecutions but also the wider inquiry, and that's something we're very keen to do. But of course I'm happy to engage with him to make sure anything he thinks we need, any lessons we need to learn. This is not just a lessons learned exercise. We want to hold people to account, but there are also lessons we can learn. Very important that we learn them, and I'm very happy to talk to him about what he thinks we should do in addition to what we set out already.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. No one, particularly nobody in public life, should get away with perjury or perverting the course of justice or attempting to do so or conspiring to do so. So I'm very glad to hear the Minister say today, as he did in response to me earlier this week, that the question of further prosecutions arising out of this scandal should be very carefully looked at. But on the question of financial redress, does he agree with me that it's very important that the victims, those who've been convicted, should get legal advice? Because if, as I suspect, these prosecutions were malicious prosecutions, then the damages to which they are entitled could be very, very hefty, and it would be unwise to accept any offer, generous as it might be, from the Minister until they've got legal advice about what they would be entitled to if they could prove that these were malicious prosecutions.
Minister.
Yeah, well, thank you again for her remarks. And yes, I would like to see prosecutions flow from this. And then The inquiry will help with that, of course, and there'll be other investigations ongoing from prosecution authorities. Legal advice is hugely important, and the schemes we are running in compensation do provide legal advice to individuals who are thinking of taking off, and that should be very carefully considered, of course, before people choose a certain one route or another. We're trying to make sure the choice is as easy as possible, and when people have made that choice, the compensation is delivered as quickly as possible.
Virginia Crosby.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Noel Thomas, one of my Anasmore constituents, was a former sub-postmaster who was wrongly convicted. His conviction of false accounting in 2006 was overturned by the Court of Appeal in 2021. How is my right honourable friend ensuring that sub-postmasters across the UK, like Noel Thomas, are heard, supported, recompensed, recognised and, most importantly, exonerated? And would the Minister meet with my constituent, Noel Thomas, should he wish to do so?
Minister.
Well, I'd be delighted to meet with him, and I thought a key part of the Mr Bates versus the Post Office, that dramatisation, that excellent dramatisation, and also the real story that sits behind that as well, which people can watch, again features Mr Thomas. I'd be delighted to meet with him. I thought his story was incredibly moving, and anybody who saw it would be moved by it. So, yes, of course, I will meet with him. I'm keen to make sure he gets the apology he deserves, but also the redress that he deserves. So I'm sure that's something we can discuss when we meet. But and we're keen to make sure that the compensation schemes work as effectively as possible to make sure Mr Thomas gets that kind of compensation he needs and is able to move on with his life.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, following the excellent ITV drama, and I do congratulate the makers of that drama, there is a clear belief expressed by my constituents that sub-postmasters and mistresses must have their names cleared and be fully compensated. But there's also a view that those responsible for this appalling miscarriage of justice should be held to account. And I think that's what we need to see unfolding in the next months. One of my constituents said, "The whole affair has made me ashamed of the Post Office hierarchy, the government and the UK legal system." So what is the Minister and the Government going to do to restore public trust? And can he expand on the timescale of action being taken to ensure justice and the fullest redress is actually given to all those affected?
Minister.
Yes, well, thank you for a question. I mean, having dealt with a number of different redress schemes over the years, one prior to that with some of the banking scandals we saw, my experience with victims, and certainly the same with the Post Office, is people want two things. They want compensation, but they want people to be held to account. Not least because if people are held to account, it might reduce the chances of this ever happening again if people know they will be held to account, and that acts as a deterrent, of course, as well as something that people want to see to make sure justice is served. So, of course, we're not in charge of prosecutions. They're done by our prosecution, various people in charge of prosecutions, the police and the CPS. I'm sure they're looking at the evidence very closely. It's already out there, and the further evidence that comes to light through the inquiry. The inquiry is due to complete by the end of this year, and hope to report soon after. So that's the inquiry side of it. In terms of compensation, I say we're keen to deliver all compensation by August of this year, and hopefully sooner than that.
Jim Shannon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister so much for his clear commitment and indeed for his perseverance as well. When he took this on, the Right Honourable Member and Minister very clearly want to have a result. Minister, for those families who have an empty seat at the table, and many do, the compensation doesn't come close to cutting it, as we say in Northern Ireland. They all want justice. So what justice can be delivered in terms of making the software producer, Fujitsu, whose software is still being used by government agencies, to ensure that there's accountability and some form from them of restitution? Thank you.
I thank him for his constant contributions on this particular subject, and many others, of course. And for me, it's been a pleasure to do this role and to be able to take on this particular issue, this huge issue, because he and I both spoke on this as backbenchers. And so to be able to make progress, that the progress we've seen today is a pleasure, because you know you are helping people who have been lives have been devastated. So it's my pleasure to do the work I'm doing on this in this particular area. Again, I thank again members of the opposition parties for their support in that to that end, and indeed the officials who have done a tremendous job throughout this in terms of trying to make sure we get to justice as quickly as possible and people are compensated as quickly as possible. Yes, we should identify those responsible, be it organisations like Fujitsu or individuals, and hold them to account. And so there's a very significant compensation bill that's currently being funded by the taxpayer in this area. It seems only right and reasonable that any organisations, any companies responsible for this scandal would also contribute towards that compensation.
Holly Lynch.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Mr Robinson in my constituency ran the Illingworth Road post office. When he had the Horizon software installed and he couldn't get the figures to add up, born out of desperation and unable to get the post office to understand, he began to move money between the DWP and the Horizon software. He was then prosecuted by the Department of Work and Pensions. He didn't benefit from any of the money. It was alleged that he had stolen, but as such he's not been eligible for compensation for the £43,000 he was forced to pay back, or for the time he spent in prison, or because of the flawed software. If I write to the Minister with the details of Mr Robinson's case, would he agree to have a look at that and hopefully provide some advice about how we can finally clear Mr Robinson's name?
Minister.
Well, thank you very much. Thank her very much for her point. I'm very keen to work with her on that, and we're aware of some of the cases, both with CPS and with the DWP cases. So yes, indeed, I'd be very keen to find out exactly what happened in this case. It's our intention that anybody who suffered a conviction because of Horizon is properly compensated. So I can give her that assurance. Very keen to work with her on it. And what she does, actually, the case she raises does illustrate some of the complexities around this, about isolating exactly what was responsible for somebody's conviction. It can be something other than that, when people trying to compensate for the sum of the losses in one part of their business resulted in a conviction in another part of their business. Is one of the things we looked at when we were looking at solutions, and that's how we finally arrived at this solution, which is this comprehensive overturning of convictions.
Daisy Cooper.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we all want to see swift financial redress and justice, and many members across the House have talked also about accountability. Now, Paul Reynolds, I think, has quite rightly handed back her CBE, but many sub-postmasters are asking why she was given it in the first place, and also why she was also given a role as Director of the Cabinet Office.
Absolutely.
Is the Minister in a position to explain why it is that in 2019, after the High Court judgment was handed down exposing her full involvement in the Horizon scandal, why was it that she remained in post as a Director of the Cabinet Office and wasn't sacked? And if he isn't able to explain that today, would he perhaps commit to write to me with an explanation of what conversations were had at the time?
Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to take that away. She asked some fair questions. I think it was right and proper that the former CEO, Paula Vanel's, handed back her CBE. I stood at this dispatch box and said, as a former CEO myself, I think you cannot expect to be honoured for services to an organisation at a time when the organisation was failing so many of its key people at the same time. So I think it's absolutely right. I'm very happy to look at the points she raises. It clearly was prior to my time in government, but she raises some interesting points. I don't know the answer to her question. I think with hindsight, many people would see that as a mistake, but I'm very happy to take that away.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank and welcome the Minister for his statement today. I had several constituents affected by this particular scandal, but one of my constituents has written to me to say that when they appealed in 2019, when the group claimant was made against Horizon and their appeal was successful, they were told that their costs would be deducted from the compensation, which therefore left a very small amount of money for them to be compensated. Now, I did actually table a question on this and wrote to a minister 3 years ago about this, but I had effectively no response. So can I just seek assurance from the minister that those people will be now properly compensated and not have the cost deducted?
Minister.
Okay, thank you for pointing out her work on this in the past. She's right to say the 555, so postmasters who took the group litigation order forward, I think £57 million settlement, 46 million of which was taken by the legal representatives, leaving 20,000 pounds each. That was something as a backbencher. I was very keen to make sure there was a scheme for those people, rather than just the other people who hadn't taken part of that action. That was brought forward by the government, the group litigation order scheme, which we are now in the process of, and we've settled, I think I'm right in saying 21 cases already as part of that scheme, where people have received full and final compensation, can also get interim payments through that scheme, and can now, as I've announced today, can choose, rather than the full assessment route, can go down the fixed sum award route of £75,000. That's open to her constituent that she refers to. So there are schemes available, a scheme available that her constituents can take advantage of.
Jonathan Edwards.
Deputy Speaker, the public outcry as a result of the ITV drama clearly indicates the huge support for our postmasters amongst the public. So therefore, as a part of righting the wrong of the arising scandal, is it not time to look at the remuneration of our current sub-postmasters, including the option of directly employing them as opposed to the independent contracting system we have at the moment, if they so wish, so that the income reflects their huge contribution to our communities?
Minister.
Well, I absolutely agree with him that we've got to improve remuneration of sub-postmasters and the businesses sub-postmasters run. We want to make sure we've got a viable network going forward. We have 11,700 branches around the country. We set a minimum number of 11,500. A minimum of 99% of our population has got to be within 3 miles of a post office. So there are criteria that we've always set, access criteria. We're keen to make sure that the network is viable going forward. We think the best way to do that, he offers one solution to that. The government offers significant financing already for the post office, about £2.5 billion over the last 10 years, in addition to other financial commitments we've made for other matters, such as rebuilding the IT system. So, but certainly we feel that the post office network has a bright future, but particularly in areas like access to cash, the banking framework, and as parcel hubs, we see that remuneration opportunity improving in future years.
Michael Shacks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Monday, I asked the Minister about how we can make sure any system is the same across the whole of the UK. And I wonder, in the past few days before today's announcements, what discussions he's had with the Lord Advocate in Scotland about these decisions, and in particular, any consideration he's given to a legislative consent motion so that actually this Parliament could legislate to make sure the same system is in place across the whole of the UK, something that reportedly the Scottish Government is minded to consider. And if that's not the case, if the Scottish Parliament takes a different approach, how will he make sure the compensation regime is the same across the whole of the UK, so that people who maybe don't have their convictions changed in Scotland in the same way still have access to the same compensation?
Minister.
Do you want to answer this? I'm very keen to make sure it's a UK-wide scheme, both in terms of the compensation and people's access to it. We have had conversations already with the Scottish administration. I think those conversations happened yesterday evening to make sure they fully understood what our intention was. Clearly, these matters are devolved in Scotland, so there are different routes to make sure the scheme is one scheme across the UK. Very keen to make sure we continue those conversations and make it as easy as possible for postmasters to either overturn convictions or to access compensation.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all welcome that at long last postmasters can finally expect full justice and restitution for the devastation they and their families have suffered. However, does the Minister share my concern that, notwithstanding restitution and justice for postmasters, that the Post Office brand, the Post Office, once a most trusted brand and trusted institution, has been forever and irreparably tarnished by those who presided over this scandal, prosecuting and persecuting so many decent people who were serving their communities?
Well said. Minister.
I don't quite agree with that. Clearly, it's not been the Post Office's finest hour by a long chalk, but I think the Post Office brand itself is revered around the country. I absolutely think that. I think the reputation of Post Office Limited, the central organisation of Post Office Limited, has been tarnished. We're keen to move on and rebuild that relationship, help the Post Office rebuild that relationship. They've recruited, for example, 100 area managers to try and improve their relationship with the sub-postmasters, which I think is helping, but there is work to do to improve that relationship between the centre and the network. But I absolutely believe, so it's my experience as a constituency MP, that my constituents very much appreciate, value and revere the post offices in their community.
Kate Osborne.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for some of the detail around the announcement today regarding the convictions. This will come as a relief to many. Madam Deputy Speaker, as highlighted by the ITV show, the 555 worked tirelessly for justice, and this, of course, opened the door for so many others. But they feel that they're being penalised for taking this litigation forward, with compensation still not being paid to so many. So, as well as others, the Post Office need to be held responsible for the part that they've played in this scandal at every stage, at the lies, at the blocking of justice. And yet it is the Post Office and the government's expensive lawyers that are currently litigating every case. And I just have to ask the question whether that surely is right. So will the Minister look to remove the Post Office from all the roles that it plays at the moment in relation to compensation decisions, and instead put in place a more independent, arm's-length body that will deliver full and fair compensation to all?
Minister.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Member for Jarrow for her work again. She's somebody we've engaged with on a regular basis about this issue, and she worked very hard on this issue on behalf of her constituents. We're keen to make that compensation available more quickly. As announced today, her constituents will, if they're part of the 555, the GLO, they will have access to the fixed sum award route of £75,000, which is a much quicker route. But if they go down the full assessment route, which they obviously have a right to do, we've committed, once a claim is submitted, that DBT, the dispute resolution process, will respond to that claim within 40 days in 90% of cases. She's wrong to say that this is litigated against. The process is done by dispute resolution with my department, not with the Post Office. And where that can't be agreed, then that is sent to an independent panel. The independent panel would then recommend what award should be given. So there is independence. The Post Office is not involved, and independence is at the very heart of this process. So I do believe that her constituents will get full and fair outcomes, but we want to make sure that's done as quickly as possible, and that's something we're working on a daily basis.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Russell Ward Best from Ottery St Mary was accused of stealing £17,000. He avoided prosecution by resigning, and another sub-postmaster who I represent paid the alleged shortfall to avoid prosecution. Russell Ward Best was declared bankrupt and died before he was found innocent and was cleared. Can the Minister comment on financial redress for all sub-postmasters and their families, including those who were not prosecuted?
Minister.
Well, Ken, thank you for this question, and I'm very sorry to hear what happened to Mr Ward Best. Mr Ward Best should be able to get compensation, or his family should be able to get compensation through the Historic Shortfall Scheme. That scheme is there to put Mr Ward Best, if he was still with us, back to the place he would have been had this detriment not occurred. And that can take into account things like bankruptcy, of course. And that money then would be paid to his estate, which would then flow through to his family. So that the same compensation is available, despite, very sadly, Mr Ward Best no longer being with us.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the very sinister features of all of this scandal has been the way in which the Post Office have tried to intimidate
and scare people into compliance during this whole scandal. And in reading into this, I had read that those that were receiving a historic shortfall scheme offer had been erroneously told by the Post Office that they weren't allowed to talk about the terms of that compensation. They had no right to do so, but there will be a legacy of people who have been told this, being very scared to talk out about it, not wanting to cause a fuss in case because they may believe that they are not allowed to do so. Can you put something on the record to give reassurance to these people that have been deliberately and maliciously misled by the Post Office into silence? Because really they should not be able to do that, and those that have been affected by this should be able to have their story told and get justice.
Minister.
Well, thank you for a point. The shortfall scheme, I'm not aware of the particular case she refers to, but certainly it is our position that we want to work closely with people in that scheme who have experienced that scheme, been through that scheme. One of the reasons we put the advisory board in place, which originally just covered the group litigation order claims, we expanded its remit to cover all 3 schemes, so it could look at all those schemes to make sure they provided fair outcomes for people in all of the 3 different schemes, to give that level of consistency across 3 schemes. So I'm very happy. She may want to contact the Noble Lord Arbuthnot, or indeed the Right Member for North Durham, to discuss her concerns around that. It's something I'm very happy to discuss with the advisory board and see what might need to be done.
And finally, Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We can never unright the original wrong nor undo all the suffering. All we can do is make sure that the misery is not ongoing. For those who do not look for a grand pardon, what rights of appeal exist other than a request to the Criminal Cases Review Commission?
Minister.
Well, she's absolutely right to say that no amount of financial compensation can ever make good what has happened to many of these people, whether it's loss of homes, whether it's loss of businesses, loss of livelihoods, loss of reputation, loss of life. So no amount of money can ever compensate for that, but we're keen to make sure people do get compensated wherever we can across all those different areas. And compensation schemes do provide for what's called pecuniary losses and non-pecuniary losses, which are some of the things that sadly have happened to people in their personal lives, for example. So that's exactly what we set out today. We're keen to make sure if people are overturning convictions, there's no requirement to go to the CCRC to do that. It's something we can do through legislation in this place, and we'll be setting out exactly what we expect to do in terms of delivering that in the coming weeks.
Thank you. I thank the Minister for coming to the House again and for answering so thoroughly a great many questions. It is very obvious that the House is concerned about this matter.